With great pleasure, I welcome you all to the Scholars 2020 Immigration Symposium, the many faces of immigration. My name is Gabriel Sainz. I am the symposium editor for the Scholar, St. Mary's Law Review on Race and Social Justice. Please note the folders inside your bags. They contain the agenda, speaker bios, and PowerPoint so that you may follow along during the presentation. The restrooms are in the first floor in the front. You may take the stairs or the elevators to get to them. Please take full advantage of our vendors and of the exhibits. The Institute of Texan Cultures has very graciously closed down the museum for your enjoyment. Please make sure to take advantage of them all. We chose this venue for that very specific purpose, to provide you the rich cultural context in which the many faces of immigration make up Texas in the United States. Lastly, I want to recognize some of the distinguished guests here amongst us. We recognize Secretary and Mayor Henry Cisneros, St. Mary's Law School Dean Vincent Johnson, Councilwoman Mariachi Cisneros, and United Farm Workers President and successor to Cesar Chavez, Mr. Arturo Rodriguez and his wife, Sonia Rodriguez. We will begin with an opening prayer by St. Mary's Professor very own, David A. Granado.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. The book of Hebrews, chapter 13, verse 2 states, "Do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it." God, thank you for giving us the opportunity to serve and show hospitality to immigrants and refugees who many times show us the best of humanity and also what it means to be extraordinary. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 10, verses 18 through 19 state, "He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. And you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt." God, thank you for allowing us to live in a country built by immigrants and for allowing us to love immigrants and refugees who seek a better life for themselves and their families. And thank you for bringing together all of us here today, starting with the incredible speakers who have traveled near and far to share their time and expertise with us. Thank you for the faculty and staff who made this symposium possible. Thank you for all of the generous donors, sponsors, and supporters who make this tremendous event a reality. God, thank you in particular for our amazing students whose passion, resilience, and relentless work ethic embodies the spirit of the scholar and our entire law school. And of course, we pray for those who are part of the legal system, the judges, attorneys, student attorneys, our clinic, and certainly those immigrants and refugees who are at the heart of these matters. Please help all those involved in the legal system and the political process to meet incivility with civility and professionalism, regardless of how difficult that can be at times. Let the Catholic and Marianist principle that every person has dignity because we are all made in the likeness of image of God be shared and demonstrated by everyone, regardless of their religion or creed, to make sure immigrants and refugees at every step are treated with dignity. And help all of us to do our very best to treat each other with dignity and respect. In your name we pray, amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Thank you, Professor Granado, for those beautiful words. Next, Dean Johnson will share some opening remarks.
Welcome to the Immigration Symposium. This symposium is hosted by the Scholar Law Review on Race and Social Justice. The Scholar is one of America's leading law reviews dealing with issues related to minorities and social justice, and they have been at this work for almost 25 years. When we look back over what the Scholar has published, we see a very rich foundation of understanding of these issues that goes back to the 1990s, when the Scholar was founded by Dean Barbara Aldave. The Scholar has published articles on language rights, on human rights, on educational testing, on child protective services, on race relations, on gay rights, on gender in the law, on American Indians, and that was just the start. They've published articles on disabilities, restrictive covenants, educational opportunities, women in developing countries, post-apartheid South Africa, agricultural workers, non-traditional students, cultural heritage, land reform, and then there was more. They published articles on prescription drugs and charter schools and commercial terrorism, on child custody, medical malpractice, affirmative action, and redistricting, but there were more issues to address. And they published articles on police misconduct, on the war on terror, on Islamic charities, on mortgage lending, on worker visas, on religious land use, on drug courts, on transracial adoptions, but there were additional social justice issues to address. And so they published articles on Medicaid, on procedural due process, on anti-homeless ordinances, on racial profiling, on school financing, on injured minors, on pregnant teenagers, on capital murder, but there were still more issues. And they published articles on school vouchers, domestic violence, sex workers, sexual predators, immigration, immigrant laborers, healthcare crisis, on school violence, and on mortgages, and that was only the first 10 years. We are now in year 22, so the list would go far on. When the Scholar has chosen to focus this year on immigration, they have addressed one of the defining issues of our time, one of the most complex, the most important, one that has global ramifications, and so they come at this task by hard work over many years, supported by the faculty members of St. Mary's University School of Law. The door to this area of expertise was opened by Dean Barbara Aldave in the 1990s when she was the dean of St. Mary's University School of Law. Barbara Aldave, she was a great dean. She was formidable, brilliant, energetic, funny, charming. There were many who felt energized by her presence and her ideas and renewed, and there were others who felt infuriated and frustrated because she was tackling controversial issues. I think that Barbara, if she were here today, she would be quite pleased to see the work of the Scholar addressing the issues of immigration. Welcome to the symposium. Have a great day.
Hi, good morning. My name is Valeria Montalvo. I'm an associate editor for Volume 22. This year, I've been working closely with our staff writers. We've been editing our comments and articles, and we have a really exciting immigration issue coming up in the next few months. We have some interesting topics such as child detention and the application of the exclusionary rule to removal proceedings. We really hope y'all get to read it in the next few months. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce someone who's doing amazing work in Mexico, who I've had the pleasure of working with in the past, Ms. Tran Dang. Ms. Tran Dang is a former large law firm attorney who has represented victims of persecution in regional human rights forums and systems, UNHCR, and the UN Special Procedures. Before moving to Mexico, where she currently resides, she directed a human rights office and legal aid clinic in Bangkok, Thailand. Her work in Latin America centers around the rights of asylum seekers, labor migrants, and deportees. In 2018, she founded the Rhizome Center for Migrants, a Houston-based nonprofit. The organization's Mexico project, based in Guadalajara, Jalisco, supports deported and returned migrants through legal aid and reintegration services. So Ms. Tran, can you please join us on the stage? Please give her a round of applause.
Well, thank you to Valeria for that introduction. Valeria actually came down to Guadalajara and spent a week with me at the beginning of last year. And so it's really great to see her again, and particularly in this setting. I also want to thank Gabriel. I'm not sure where he is now, and also the Scholar for the invitation. Thank you also to the sponsors for making this event possible. This is my first time to participate in a symposium, and so I'm happy to be here in San Antonio and thrilled to be able to participate here today with all of you and to share what I've seen, learned, and know after 4 years in Mexico. I'm the executive director of the Rhizome Center for Migrants, which is a Houston-based 501c3 nonprofit that I founded in April 2018 to defend and support the rights of deportees in Mexico. The organization's Mexico project is based in Guadalajara, where we currently provide legal services at 2 long-term shelters in the city, as well, in addition to receiving referrals from the Mexican National Institute of Migration. In Mexico, we are among the very few organizations providing U.S. services to deportees, and we are also among an even smaller clan of organizations focused entirely on the needs of deportees. In today's presentation, I'm hoping to share a little bit about who's being deported today, what that profile looks like, and what their specific legal needs are, so that it can be on your radar as you service clients here in the United States. Before I really get started, I do want to share a little bit about the general current context in Mexico. I think it would be remiss not to. I also think it's relevant to the theme of today's symposium, the many faces of immigration. For those of you who don't know Guadalajara, it's certainly an interesting place to be right now, as the face of immigration there has changed significantly in the past 10 years, as it has in Mexico in general. Mexico was once a transit country. It's now a country of destination that includes among its newer immigrants, deported Mexican migrants, Central Americans, refugees, deported communities who have fled their countries again and are now residing in Mexico, as well as asylum seekers who have been returned to Mexico from the United States. The President of Mexico proclaims to be pro-migrant, but ultimately he implemented an immigration agenda that is inconsistent with the Mexican Constitution as well as the country's international obligations. It is essentially the immigration agenda of the United States. In a very short period of time, a lot has happened politically that has impacted how and if migrants can move through Mexico, who is being deported and to where, as well as who can return to the United States, if ever. As we talk then today about the face of immigration in the United States, I think our conversation can be informed by looking beyond the border at the impact of U.S. policies and politics and how they influence the movement of people in the region. I've included this outline or this timeline to highlight some events that have affected Mexican immigrants in the United States and U.S.-Mexico relations in general. I apologize for bringing us back to 2016, but I think the situation that we have today in Mexico really began during the presidential elections when then-candidate President Trump pledged to build a wall and promised that Mexico would pay for it. Unfortunately, some might argue, but I think that Mexico did pay for that wall that now exists at its southern border. At the beginning of 2017, after President Trump took office, within his first week, he issued a series of immigration-related executive orders. One titled Enhancing Public Safety in the Interior of the United States, Lower the Standard for Enforcement Targets. Rather than prioritizing those who had been convicted of serious crimes, the new executive order made anyone who had ever been charged of a crime an enforcement target. As a result of Executive Order 13768, former long-term residents of the United States, including LPRs, veterans, and others who had already served time for their crimes, were rounded up in immigration raids across the country. The profile of those being deported and the needs that they would have after their deportation changed drastically. In September 2017, President Trump announced the end of DACA, which threatened to deport some 800,000 undocumented immigrants brought to the United States as children, of which Mexicans comprise the majority by far. Throughout 2018 and 2019, President Trump threatened to shut down the border. It was a threat that not only would have stopped Central American migration into the country, but it also would have threatened commerce by preventing the flow of goods, products, and workers. Another subgroup that would have been affected had the border been shut down are the tens of thousands of U.S. citizen children who live in Mexico and cross the border every day to attend school in the United States. Then in October 2018, President Trump he attempted to make Mexico a safe third country, which would have prevented some asylum seekers from entering U.S. ports of entry, requiring them to seek asylum in Mexico instead. Though Mexico didn't concede to the agreement, some 60,000 asylum seekers are now stranded in Mexico due to the migrant protection protocols. In June 2019, President Trump threatened to raise tariffs on Mexican products by 5%. Mexican responded immediately. This is when you saw Foreign Secretary Marcelo Ebrard rush to D.C. And what ultimately happened was that Mexico responded within weeks, sending its National Guard to its southern border to stop the movement of caravans. Mexico did such a great job that Mexicans are now again the nationality most apprehended at the U.S. border. With fewer Central Americans moving through the country, the United States was able to refocus its attention on the deportations of Mexicans. In December of 2019, Mexico and the United States entered into the an agreement called the Interior Repatriation Initiative that now deports some 250 Mexican migrants to the International Airport of Guadalajara each week. And so the next flight is later today, about an hour and a half from now, at 11 o'clock. So in the last 2 months alone, we would have seen some 1,700 migrants in Guadalajara. It was against this backdrop that I founded the Rhizome Center for Migrants. When I got to Guadalajara, I interviewed everyone in town to find out what services were being provided, who the key actors were, and where there might be service gaps. I quickly learned that there really are no resources for deported individuals or their families. And that's because Mexican migrants are not considered a priority by their country. Once AMLO took office, there was a lot of hope that things would change. But ultimately, the few resources that had been dedicated for Mexican migrants had been taken away, putting the strain on civil society organizations who often don't have the resources to provide comprehensive services. Those who are coming today have lived in the United States for decades. When they arrive in Mexico, they struggle with identity, discrimination, language barriers, difficulties adapting in the workplace, and they have no support network. Many of their family members, spouses, and children are still living in the United States. They struggle with how to provide for them and how to return to them. Much older now than they were when they first made their journey to the United States, they no longer have the energy, network, or know-how to reinvent their lives in Mexico. Deportation is a harsh reality, and unfortunately an individual journey for most people. The Rhizome Center for Migrants provides primarily legal service to the deported community. Our clinic has traditionally focused on the needs of deported Mexican migrants, but with the arrival of Central American deportees, mostly from Honduras, we have expanded our services to include deported Central American migrants who are now living in Guadalajara. Our organization provides community rights workshops, consultations, direct representation, and referrals for a host of legal issues. Areas in which we focus include civil rights, abuse reporting, immigration counseling and direct representation, support on custody and guardianship cases, and assistance with access to entitlements. These are usually labor benefits that include veterans' benefits. To the extent that a change in a criminal case outcome can affect a person's immigration opportunities, we also partner with organizations in the United States that can provide post-conviction relief. In Guadalajara, we're connected with several deported communities, including older persons, former DACA beneficiaries, rehabilitated gang members, and deported veterans. To these communities, we provide humanitarian social support in addition to legal services. One of the things that we're working on this year is expanding reintegration support through capacity building so that specific deported communities can serve as a resource for their members. Our primary purpose in Guadalajara is to ensure that people can thrive again wherever they make their lives, have certainty about their future, and can access U.S. rights that they are entitled to. Our organization has one staff member on the ground who coordinates with volunteers and as well as organizations, law clinics, and pro bono attorneys in the United States who can serve as topic issue experts and can provide much needed resources. Working with Mexican immigrants has really taught me a lot about the history of migration in the region. Mexican migration didn't really begin until 1848, when the Mexican-American War officially ended, and half of the Mexican territory at the time, which is today the American Southwest, was annexed by the United States, and Mexico relinquished its claim to Texas. But even after the end of the war, Mexico maintained close cultural and economic ties to its former territories. Residents of both countries continued to cross the border for commerce as well as to visit their family members. It wasn't until the early 1900s that the United States began to recruit Mexican rural workers. This continued throughout World War I and escalated into formalized labor agreements during World War II known as the Bracero Program. Some of you may have heard of it. From 1942 to 1964, just a little bit over 20 years, close to 4.6 million Mexicans immigrated to the United States to fill agricultural and railroad jobs. By the time the program officially ended in 1964, border crossing had then become associated with the rite of passage for young men in many parts of the country, including the state of Jalisco, where the organization is located, and the tradition and culture of migration persisted. Because Mexicans have such a long and consistent history of migration to the United States, they are today the #1 immigrant group in the United States. They are the #1 unauthorized immigrant group. They also comprise 25% of legal permanent residents. Of those eligible for DACA, Mexicans comprise 68%. Because they are the #1 immigrant group in the United States, they are also the #1 nationality deported year after year by ICE and CBP. People are often surprised by the number of Mexicans deported each year. I provided some statistics here for the last 4 years. These are ICE removals. So you can see they varied between 127,000 and close to 150,000. The numbers to the right are provided by the Mexican government, and they include not only ICE removals, but all removals from the United States. You can see that there was an average in the last 4 years of 200,000 removals, which accounts to nearly 550 per day. 90% of Mexican deportees are men. Most of the people are at least in their 40s. They have lived on average in the United States for 15 years before their removal. They're long-term residents of the United States who have deep social and cultural ties to the United States. They are American in many ways, in the way they think and act, how they dress, their gestures, and how they view their opportunities in life. Most of the people I meet with have U.S. citizen family members, either spouses or children, who remain in the United States, and they left behind any property they might have, homes, cars, and their life's accumulations. Work discrimination in Mexico starts at 35, so it's difficult to find decent, dignified work. Even construction workers have to have a resume to apply for a job, which is difficult for some people to put together. The ones who seem to do the best are the ones who can find jobs in call centers who are college age and still have time to define their life's direction. Decent pay in Mexico is $3 an hour. Without family support, it's difficult for many to survive. And homelessness, which is a huge issue in Jalisco, can be cyclical even for those who've returned for many years. It's difficult to understand what the experience of deportation means and how it affects people's lives. I've included this video, which hopefully Roy can help me with, made in the first person that gives a personal account of deportation. I think it's important to hear.
In less than an hour, I was in Tijuana, Baja California, where I had never been. I had no idea where I was gonna be. And before even that happened, I remember making a phone call to my friend, the one that I had the incident with, and him telling me, don't worry, I'm gonna make sure you're okay. When I was in Tijuana, that I got dropped off, because you get thrown like if you're nothing. He was there, so I'm glad for that, because after me being here for so long, 8 years later, I see how people get thrown out and they have no family, they have no support from anyone, and they're out there in the streets just wondering what to do with their lives. And I'm glad I had him to help me and comfort me somehow and give me shelter and a place to live. It took him a while to bring me my car, my stuff, my money I had in the bank. Because at the time that I got detained from the LAPD, my sister and my mom went to go pick up my daughter. That's just a memory that I'm not gonna take away. My daughter seeing me get taken out. And that was the last time I ever saw her too. So all those memories has had me traumatized, and I always say to the dad, try to bring her to me. He's never actually brought her. The first years he said he was gonna bring her, but he never did. I just kept waiting and waiting and waiting. She sent me these beautiful drawings, letters, until the technology got a little bit better and we Skyped. And we've talked over the phone until in 2016, he took her phone away and just decided that she was better off without me. So my heart broke even more. And it's one thing that I still don't understand. How can people think that kids are okay without their mothers? I remember being in the border in 2010 and making phone calls and just standing there because there was no line connection between the US and Mexico. Now there is, but in that time there wasn't. I had an American phone trying to talk from on the Mexican side. And after that, I kept trying to talk to the dad and let him know via messaging, and I was desperate. I wanted to be with her until finally in June of this year, 2018, he decides to reopen that case back in 2009. And I'm glad that he did that. Because of that open case, people are getting more aware of how really we are separated. So I had a court hearing July 25th, and here we are fighting for the custody and the visitations that her dad doesn't want me to have. He wants to take full legal custody with no visitations, and he did request a passport for him to visit with his family to Mexico. How can somebody take their child to Mexico when you know the mom is there? and especially we haven't seen each other for 8 years. So that's like the most difficult thing that has happened to me. She was 5 years old when I left her in the US, and the only thing I'm requesting is if he wants to share the time with her and he wants to take her to vacations and he wants to be with her, so do I. That's all I'm requesting. I'm not taking anything away. Understand my daughter needs to be in the US because I would like to be there too. And I wouldn't want to take her out of her habitat because that was my habitat too, and I wouldn't want her to feel how I feel. So I don't want to take her from her country. I don't want to take her from her dad. I don't want to take her from the stuff she loves. I just want to share that. And no matter how people try to see things, feelings are feelings and family is family, and you can't take that away. And I just hope that this can bring awareness to how much an immigrant can actually suffer and all the things that we go through. We're just trying to have a better life, a better living for our kids.
I wanted to share this video just so you get a first-person account. This video is made as part of the Humanizando la Deportación project out of California, Davis. If any of you are interested in hearing kind of more personal stories, I think they have a digital collection now of over 100 videos on YouTube. But it was, I wanted to show the video as a sort of introduction to the specific legal needs that people face in Mexico once they arrive. Family separation, which you heard a little bit about on the video, is a constant theme that we see. Mexicans who are now in Mexico established their lives in the United States over a significant period of time. So they got married, they had children. It's quite common to see mixed status families with either one or both parents who are undocumented, and nearly all of the children U.S. citizens. Separation results in legal questions regarding how the family can be reunited again, or how custody and guardianship issues will be dealt with if the parents don't get along, as in the case of the woman in the video. Other common legal needs include questions regarding legal return to the United States. Legal return as an immigrant could be based on a variety of petitions. We're usually looking out for the possibility of family-based petitions, usually in conjunction with some type of waiver. Immigrant reliefs may also be an option for victims of certain crimes. These are your U visas, victims of violence committed by legal permanent residents or U.S. citizen family members. These are your VAWA visas, as well as for sex or labor trafficked victims, your T visas. An application could also be made for persons requesting asylum protection or protection from torture under CAT. So it's important to ask what's happened to them since their removal from the United States. If you're going to be working with deported persons, you might also screen for post-conviction relief or the possibility of a pardon. Having a felony reduced to a misdemeanor can change all of the facts in a case, and so it's worth looking into. We've also seen cases in which a governor's pardon can clear the way for citizenship. This has been a helpful strategy for deported veterans, a handful of whom are now back in the United States and have already taken their oath of citizenship. These are, of course, extremely rare cases, but if you have good facts, I'd go for it. Access to earned benefits is something that not a lot of people think about, but it can make a huge difference for someone who's having difficulty holding a job or otherwise barely surviving. Earned benefits can come from unions, the Veterans Administration, or Social Security in some cases if the person was never removed. 9/11 workers, there are some who have been deported as well, who may have access to health care benefits. So definitely do some screening for work experiences to identify potential entitlements. Other issues to be on the lookout include civil rights and tort claims, fraud, and contract disputes. The Rhizome Center for Migrants currently interviews those who are being flown in on ICE Air each week regarding detention conditions. We filed 5 complaints in the last month alone to DHS, and we look forward to continuing to take up these issues with their oversight committees. Right now, we don't have the capacity or the expertise to handle prisoners' rights claims, but we have seen cases of potential medical negligence for those who are coming directly from prison. So this is on our radar, and we hope in the future to be able to team up with organizations in the United States and be able to offer that service in Mexico. Logistical and legal challenges to this work. Part of the difficulty in providing legal services from outside the United States is the lack of extensive networks and access to pro bono attorneys who can cover both federal and state issues for clients. Unlike in the United States, where legal clinics typically service a particular geographic area, in Guadalajara, I see clients coming from all over the United States, Texas, Illinois, and California mostly, but from the other states as well. Added to this challenge are other barriers such as the inability of clients to appear for their hearings and little court understanding about this, no or little access to internet in rural areas, changing phone numbers, and the fact that many clients, when they first arrive in Guadalajara, are still very much in transit. And so it can make it difficult sometimes to track them down, and it's not uncommon to lose contact with clients. I am building a binational network of legal advisors who can provide cross-border support across a host of legal issues that prevent people from being able to continue with their lives or to have certainty in it. The situation at the U.S.-Mexico border requires a new approach to serving mixed-status families who no longer live on the same side of the border. I'd like to invite those of you here today, I heard there were over 200 attorneys, to join me. Anyone who is interested in volunteering or interning, if there are attorneys who are looking for sabbatical opportunities, I'd love to talk to you maybe during the break or after this talk. I'd also like to invite law students who are interested in learning more about the situation in Guadalajara to participate in our next educational program, which will be this August 7th through the 14th in Guadalajara. If you're interested in participating, Valeria did, and she can tell you a little bit about her own experience, but you can also talk to me afterwards for more information. I'll also be in DC in the next week. I don't know if any of you will be at the National Day of Action, so I'm hoping to see some of you there. Just want to thank you for your time here today. This is my contact information if you'd like to reach out. You can call either the U.S. line or the Guadalajara line. I don't know how I did on time.
Oh, you're fine, you're fine.
Okay.
Yes. The reality of the work I do is that the vast majority of people have no relief and likely will be deported to Mexico. What can we do to help prepare them? What is the top information they need to know about returning?
I can't give all the information today, so it may be helpful for you to reach out to me also by email. But a lot of the issues that people face immediately upon return is access to identification documents. And so if they are able to approach the Mexican consulate before leaving, they can get access to, and I'm speaking specifically about Mexican migrants, but they can access their birth certificates, their INE, which is their voter registration card. These are important documents to be able to find housing, to register for school, to apply for work. And so that's the number one thing that people should do before leaving. If they are college age or if they have children who are still in school, they need to have their report cards and all of their school documentation, because it makes it a lot easier for people to continue with their life plans. There's just so much. I would email me, and then I can send you some materials that we have, or I can email everyone with specific things to go over with your clients.
Looks like we have an additional
There's
question.
one back there.
Director Day, is there any hope that Mexico's president will change his position on migrants?
Mexico is in a really difficult situation right now because they are pretty much at the behest of the United States. In the timeline that I kind of went over, you can see how easy it was to bend Mexico on a variety of immigration topics simply by threatening kind of economic sanctions and tariffs and so on. And so I think that AMLO is a pro-migrant president, but you may not see kind of the agenda that he originally had in mind when he took office.
We have another question. Do you do petitions for review with circuit courts of appeals for people removed via expedited removal?
For expedited removal, I haven't worked that much with those who have been deported kind of at the border. The focus is really on those who've lived for decades in the United States. I did mention that we do abuse documentation for those who have been deported by ICE Air, but I have not done those types of petitions.
Well, thank you, Director
So,
Tran.
thank you.